Well,
Where
I
would
would
you like
love,
to start?
Alex, just to kick off, I mean, I'd love to know the sequence, the stepping stones that took you from conservation to restoration to regeneration. What's that story look like? Was it conscious or forced upon you, or?
No, I think it was, it was, I think, trying to find identity that resonated with, right, with more and more stakeholders.
Yeah,
And so we were just adapting. But initially, I mean, yes, we, in 1996, when I was a college student, so I did start the business with a shift in the premises of just
yeah,
having the economics being the vehicle or the consequence to really conserve at that time and restore the natural ecosystem of where the yerba mate plant was coming from, and working
yeah,
with the local community. So that was really the purpose, and so that was sort of like difficult because we were a hybrid between a business and a nonprofit, and that
yeah.
was 1986. Then when your book came out, 99, I was like, yay! Okay, here is this guy who is like, triple bottom line business, cannibal forks. Okay, great. So I have used you in all my talks just to reinforce,
Good to
reinforce
hear.
like this crazy idea of, what are you trying to do? That's not a business, and you're not a nonprofit. So what are you, kind of thing? So
Yeah.
it was quite a struggle in the beginning, and then obviously then this was, oh, okay, this sounds interesting. This sort of like falls within, the value mission investments and social impact investments. And so then a lot of just different networks started to form, and see that this was a possible way of internalizing externalities, and still being still being profitable. But remember that we were small at that time, so it's easier when you're small.
Yeah.
And as you become a larger institution, I think it becomes even more interesting.
Well, just quickly, Alex, just so you know, I mean, Louise's background, I mean, now doing a lot of work with big companies, but she's done a lot of work with startup enterprises, particularly sort of B Corp type organizations, some of them coming from the US into the UK. So she's also, run some of those organizations, and I think probably shares some of your pain points and some of your thrills along the way.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
How big
indeed.
are you now? Where are you now? So now that you've landed on regeneration, I do want to hear this timeline as well, but how
Yeah,
are you
well,
thinking about it?
now we're like $100 million company, 500 employees, and sort of like we have rebirthed ourselves this year, and we love Daniel's book and his cover, because we feel that we're doing that cycle, that infinite cycle of just dying and rebirth and reorganization and refinancing ourselves, and just like we've been able to do it, and this systemic change. And so now we're in that next stage growth, that again, we never set goals like monetary goals. We had like a 2020 mission, which was to regenerate 200,000 acres and of Atlantic rainforest, and also provide like stable income stream and living wage to 1,000 families. So we've surpassed that 200,000 acres. We are at 850 families, so not quite there, but that was kind of the goal. And then that is equal to $100 million in revenues, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
where are we going to be in 10 years from now? Well, if we continue with ones and zeros, and it's easy. It's just like, okay, whatever. Like maybe it's 2 million acres and 10,000 families. Who knows? But definitely that is what we are, defining as growth now, as still
800
staying
families.
on
Yeah.
that same premise. Yeah.
No, nice. Really nice.
And we just have 2 new board members. Awesome. I mean, we have Lorna Davis from Danone
Yeah.
as board member. So we are like, yay, you know, super excited with her and, you know, all her insights and everything. We also have Emily White that she was the COO of Google and of Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook, believe it or not. So it's like, you know, one of these high-tech
helpful. Yeah.
executive women that she's awesome. And she's also the president of the investment group that just came in. So we're really happy with how things are sort of like turning around. And I, you know, one of the questions that shows up, you know, every day is, you know, how do you define the resilience? And I think this is a good example for the business world. I mean, we were faced up with the same challenges that everyone has. And I think people came together and wanted Guayaki to continue in business because of the purpose that the vision and mission has. You know, I'm convinced that that's the reason why we're still in business and we're still alive and thriving and excited and, you know, with all the negative news and everything, but we're like, this is an awesome time to live and to make a difference, you know. So
see, Alex, well, it reminds me a lot of, like, in the circles of Regenesis Institute and Regenesis Group, they have a beautiful framing that they call being friends in the work, creating a sort of field together that is really truly transformative and where there's mutual understanding. And I observe you creating that throughout, not just with the employees of the company, but with everything, everywhere you touch, like even the way that you market into US college, an alternative to Red Bull, drinking a plant that is much healthier with less sugar, and doing something positive to the people that grow the plant further south in South America. For me, that whole process of nurturing relationships first and foremost, that's what gives you the resilience when in a crisis like that, you need people to come together, because it's about relationships, not about numbers.
Yeah, and also relationships with the ecosystems. And we can get into that because that is also, you know, highly resilient. Sorry, but
I was just going to say branding is so incredibly important. And when we last talked, you talked about why key. I mean, that sort of making the brand accessible to people, and that was, you know, you can do really good work, but unless you can somehow get it through to people and stick it in their brain, it's not going to necessarily succeed. And incidentally, Lorna, I'd only just recently heard of, and I'd just been having an exchange with her over the last sort of few days. And I think I'm talking to her on Thursday on a Zoom call. So this is sort of serendipity in a way. But what I've seen of her and her dog Stir Fry to date, I find wonderful.
Yeah. Yes.
The other bit that I was wondering that you could maybe share a little bit about, because I think that two things that I think are very interesting to highlight. One of them is the way that you've been also, beyond just producing the product and getting it to market, been collaborating with academic networks around South America, with the Sistema B movement, and Pedro Tarak's been a long-standing friend and investor in your company, and so there's a mutual cross-fertilization of ideas into that world. And then also this recent move, which I think is amazing, because the way that you decided to pay for the rain that falls on the rainforest where the Yerba Mate is grown in an indirect way by supporting Gaia Amazonas, who are working with the tribes that are the guardians of the rainforest that generates your rain in Amazonia, thousands of kilometers further north. Can you share a bit about that?
That's lovely.
Yeah, that is sort of like, you know, we've in this regenerative transformation, I would say, because it's sort of like a constant dynamic succession of learning. And it was just recently really that we haven't had a water footprint, and we're a beverage company. Yeah. We're like, it's like, oh my God, it's like so this is why we're so excited, because it's just like every day there is new stuff that we can really exciting to do. And so anyway, as we started to dig in, one of the issues that came up is that if we're making like really strong efforts to regenerate the Atlantic forest, but that Atlantic forest, that ecosystem is 100% interdependent with another ecosystem because of the rainfall through the sky rivers that are produced by the transevaporation of the trees in the Amazon, then we need to also be valuing that other ecosystem that this ecosystem is dependent on. So that's what we decided. Wow, this is like Pedro thought that was like clearly a really strong, message that we could send to all the, agricultural production in La Cuenca del Plata, and in the southern part of the South Hemisphere. And so we signed an agreement with Gaia Amazonas, with Martin von Hildebrand, and because why him? Well, just those things in life. My daughter playing in the water with this kid in Costa Rica, and that kid happened to be Martin's von Hildebrand grandson. And I got
like, I love it.
Oh, I love it. It's like
I've only met him once. I fell in love immediately, but
it was like all these messages. And I had met Martin in Talberg like 10 years ago. And, I went to his talks, and it was pretty amazing. And anyway, but I never saw him again for like a decade.
Yeah.
So this was his grandson, like the next generation, talking to me together with my daughter about water. And then it was like an epiphany. It was like, oh my God, water, of course, clearly I see it. And that's how, we know we're making maybe a small difference. It's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
But we know that by doing this, we came out in all the news, radio stations and everything, with Pedro, with Carlos Nobre, which is the science part of all of this about the flying rivers. He was the former president of the INPI. Yeah. And great guy. He signed he signed the contract too, as helped us develop it together with Daniel as well. I said, we need somebody that will support this from the academics, from just the theory, and Daniel was like, I have my issues, but I'll sign this, and I think it's a good example. And I'm also aligned with Daniel's concerns about it, of monetarizing natural capital and social capital too. But as long as we're just doing it as benchmarks to just create more questions that take us to more answers, like Daniel's book is about. It's all questions. I think we're on the right track.
Alex, what I love about this particular way of you operating there is that you don't go down to, okay, now employ another consultant that throws a sort of big data collecting process and a very detailed monetizing of the value of rain for your production. And then you calculate it down to a few cents and say, that's as much as we'll give you. But you've basically just made a call to say, there is some benefit coming from that part of the world. And this organization is in a very diffuse way supporting many tribal people in tens of thousands of hectares of Amazon rainforest to stay under indigenous management and ownership. And we're just going to put some of our profits towards supporting that, rather than quantifying it down to the detail. And I think it's precisely that sort of somewhat fuzzy way of paying forward and paying back that I think is actually exemplary here, because otherwise we're just going to create a whole nother accounting system of different capitals, and that's where the danger of encroachment and yeah,
Yeah,
what's it
maybe,
called? Taking more of the commons away even further.
maybe it's just the way, maybe it's just a stepping stone, right? Just to capture people attention and start shifting their mindsets, you know. And if we don't, you know, talk about, you know, the economy and, you know, we sort of like, it's all integrated, right? So the ability that we have as a business is that, you know, that we can sort of like make differences in the financial world and make differences in management, make differences, you know, just how you operate in a business that was a small business, but now it's kind of like a medium going to a large business. And how do you keep, you know, this balance on growth together with your KPIs, measuring, you know, your basically your footprint and your life cycle and your offsets and not only the offsets, but how can you regenerate even like, you know, whatever, it be carbon negative or you know, even go beyond zero emissions, right? And so I think that is, to me, what's most inspiring, and I think it represents also the board, you know, and the direction that we want to go. When we're talking about growth, it's not that growth with a particular, oh yeah, we want to be the biggest, you know, beverage company in the world, and we want to kick ass and Red Bull and Sox, and no, it's not that dualistic mind frame of you know, I win, you lose. It's more like looking for that collective intelligence, that, you know, emotional intelligence in a group of people that you can sit down and sort of like, wow, inspire many, and you know what, you know, be surprised on, you know, from those blind spots that somebody picks up on you and you go like, oh yeah, you know, just so how rich can those relationships are when you have these open dialogues.
And Alex, I'd love to know whether as you grow, I mean, you talked about some of the sort of ambitions around growth in terms of families supported and other things, but do you think it's possible to grow anywhere near the current system and not succumb to buyouts and this? I mean, I may have told you, but I mean, I was involved in the sale of Ben & Jerry's to Unilever and was at the board meeting where that happened in 1999. And they just felt that over time, without totally realizing what was happening, they got themselves into a position where they were left with no possibility but to sell to somebody. And can you see an independent future, if that's what you want? And I can't see how you can do what you want to do without being independent. That somehow enables you to escape the big people.
Yeah, I have a similar question around what your investors want, because you just refinanced this year.
Yeah, and you know, and when we refinanced this year, we basically we were left in the altar on March 10th.
Oh. Okay.
Right then, right when the whole world was shutting down, right? It was like starting, and like, go back home because you're not going to be able to make it back home. And we were in LA, and we were left in the altar, and we were like, okay, now what, right? And then we enter into this dark age, if you want, where we started to see differences among the managing partners, and they got into a control command kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And it was pretty much like, this is an emergency, we're going to have losses, and this is normal. And we're like, no, we're going to hunker down, We're not, you know, so there was a divide among the 5 managing partners, and we had to go to all the shareholders in 72 hours and amend the articles.
Wow.
Of the board, and we did it. You know, we got 78% approval. So we changed the voting rights on the board, and we were able to stick with hunker down, and we're going to figure this out, but we're going to stick with the values, and we're going to stick with the spirit of the Yerba Mate plant, and we're just going to, as esoteric as it sounds, but we're just going to listen and be very alert to what are going to be the next steps. And these are like, you know, 24-hour decisions that were happening. Everything was very fast. And, but we were alert, and we were, you know, we believed in that uncertainty. The control and command, we knew where it was going to end, right? The company was going to get sold, and it was 25 years, you know, of being in business and building this up. It was going to go just blow it up and end up probably in the wrong hands, you know, that we're going to just use it to, you know, take that legacy and just, you know, just grow.
So what happened with the 22%?
We bought them out.
All right.
And how do we buy them out? And we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
Well, interesting enough, who left us in the altar had a redemption at the last minute.
Hallelujah. Wonderful.
Hallelujah. Came back and said, I'm sorry, the capitalist, you know, beast came out of me. And, you know, I made a mistake. We love you guys. We love everything you represent. And we'll go with all the terms that you guys want. And, you know, open check.
That's miraculous. Yeah.
And it was just miraculous. Exactly. It was one of those unicorns, right?
Yes.
That it was, you go like, okay, then we're going in the right way. This is, you know.
Wonderful.
You knew that, Daniel, right? We shared that with you, right?
I didn't know the whole story of that, but I deeply believe in the if you set intention with integrity, then those kind of miracles do actually happen. So they're not completely coincidental. They are to do with the integrity from which the true intention is being projected. So well done, congratulations.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I have to jump off in a second, but I have one thing I wanted to dig into more. Maybe we can do it another time as well. Was you talked about this idea of rebirth and refinance to regenerate. And funnily enough, John and I were talking about this for our company not that long ago. You know, I think I was brought in to help rebirth something, and as far as I can see, it's one of the necessary attitudes, if nothing else, intentions for all companies as we go forward, that they have to transform, but really thinking about it as a rebirth that is natural in order to continue to survive and succeed. I just think it's a really interesting concept.
I think, Louise, it's even going beyond individual companies. The regeneration in and of itself is the
rebirth. Of course it is.
To reinvent and repattern.
Yes, no, exactly. But for companies to what I'm thinking about is to create something that feels safer for companies than to say, right, you know, what I'm saying at the moment is every company, every sector, every industry has to transform or die, quite frankly, which I believe is true. But framing it as a rebirth from the company setting could be a way of creating that safe space to think about it. There's something very interesting there that you're...
Certain forms of Christianity in some people.
No, can we not involve Christianity, please? Please?
You know, if you talk with Lorna in a couple of days, she's going through this process with the Australian Aborigines, which they believe that, after death,
Yeah.
life, comes, and it's necessary as, as a process to regenerate. And and it has so much to do with uncertainty.
Yes.
Just embracing it.
Yeah.
And not really trying to hold on to the control mode, control and command, and because that's what doesn't allow that beautiful cycle to flow.
Yeah, exactly. If we feel it's a natural thing and it's okay, then it feels, it's less scary because there's less, feeling of needing to control it, knowing that it actually is natural.
Yeah, and it's so related to, blocking that flow with your own ego in a conversation and in decision making to what is happening in the ecosystems where the life cycle of that product of service is being produced, right? Yeah. So it's all connected. Yes. And you can get into the KPIs and really measure it. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. and see the benefits of maybe if you're doing shade-grown yerba mate with the climate change, how more resilient that crop is than a sun-grown yerba mate plant. So then, oh my God, here's also the relationship, you see.
Yes, no, there's a lot of richness there. I would love to somehow dig into it further, but I am going to have to jump off. So John, I'm charging you with figuring out how you might.
I think somebody pressed the record button, so you might have sort of.
Oh yes, maybe that'll do. And I'll be coming back to you, Alex, if that's all right. And Daniel
Absolutely.
and I are also overdue. It was lovely to meet you briefly. Thank you for letting me crash. And I will speak to you all later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you both for allowing that to happen.
Thank you.
So the two of you already had a conversation prior to this. This is not the first time the two of you are meeting. I wasn't quite sure on that.
Well, I watched the interview between the two of you, which I found remarkable, and I am pretty sure we've had a prior conversation.
I think we did, because I think it was through Alejandro. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was through Alejandro.
Alejandro Litovsky.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense perfectly. Yeah, because he worked for Volans for quite some time. No?
He did. Yes, about almost a year, I think. So I mean, I'm finding this absolutely riveting. I think that story of death and rebirth is sort of wonderful to watch from a safe distance. Horrible when you're right in the midst of it, but deeply character forming. So well done for coming through that and just sort of sponging up or coping with that sort of stress. I mean, as you said, it was 72 hours, or the intense period was relatively short, but nonetheless, that feels like a decade at times. So it's really impressive, and I'm really intrigued to see how the story evolves over time. I think Lorna, from what little I've seen of her, seems quite extraordinary, and I'm not surprised to hear about her interest in the Aboriginal peoples.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And together, I think that the future, it's not so much to look for destiny, but allow destiny to come to you.
Yeah.
And framed in so many ways, right? I think Daniel also just framed it yesterday when he said a land found us, me and my family. So now, Daniel, you found each other. Now it's like the land finds you, and you find the land, and you sort of same thing with destiny. And I love the concept of the green swan, because it sort of defines, that we do live in you can measure all the patterns of dynamic succession and changes and everything. But there is
Yeah.
always, this uncertainty that is, allows that death and rebirth to occur, and in such a magnificent way, that
Well, it's funny too, because when I started out to write that book, I was writing a book on artificial intelligence, and yet it changed. It changed, and it was almost as though the book started to speak, which is sort of nice when it happens. But what I'm finding at the moment is extraordinary. And Daniel, you have this extraordinary generosity where you share your contacts. I try to do the same where I can. And I think it's one of those moments where we've not only got to do that, but we've actually got to shape something that's much bigger than us. And the idea of the Green Swan, obviously, is it's not just an individual glorious champion or CEO. It's not simply a brand or a company. These are political, they're cultural, they're market dynamics. They're much bigger than us. But we have an important role to play in bringing them to life, and to some degree shaping them over time. It was really funny. I did a board meeting this morning with Santander, the bank, and the UK end, but some of the continental European directors as well. And I was asked to do a presentation and sort of inspire or stimulate that board meeting. And I did it. And then I did something which was I'd never done before, which was just to say, you may have seen, you may not, but Doug McMillan, who's the CEO of Walmart's done this 14-minute video. Basically, Paul Hawken has sort of briefed Doug McMillan, and he's done this talk, which is fundamentally about committing Walmart to regeneration. Now, I don't think most of Walmart properly understands what regeneration means or should mean, but it's a very brave decision by a CEO to say, I believe in this. I think this is something that we should do. Some of the and what I asked each of the board members of the Santander people was to watch that 14-minute video and then just talk to their colleagues, talk to all of us about what they thought of it. And the first two, both women as it happened, said, don't like Walmart, have actually been a supplier to Walmart. It's brutal. And I don't trust this guy. And yet, both of them, towards the end of what they said, and yet when I watched him say what he was saying, I felt that there was something genuine there as well. And then sort of 10, 12 other people came in, and it was extraordinary to feel the shift happening across, that people wanted to believe in regeneration. They wanted that story to be true. They wanted to know what they should do there. So, and I'm sort of at this point and feeling this is a sort of semi-magical moment where suddenly things are becoming in the next few years possible that were just impossible for a very long period of time. But what we do as a species, every time we have one of these moments, is we corrupt the language, we corrode it, we dilute it out of sight. And regeneration, I think, is going to be a little bit harder to dilute than sustainability has been. But I really feel that there's something that needs to be done to secure, not the intellectual property, it's not that sort of game, but the spirit of, the meaning of the language. And I think what you've been doing, and going out to the sky rivers and all the rest of it, it's just a different way of experiencing our world. And I think question is, partly in my mind, how do you get the sort of people who are moving in this direction or wanting to have some sense of what that might look like, what that might feel like, what that might imply for their lives, not just for their careers and so on. And I don't have any answers. I mean, I'm just at the stage of...
I find that Alex's story actually exemplifies something that is, like Alex put it, don't search for destiny, like get out of the way and let destiny find you. It's the reason why people resonate with the notion of regeneration is that if they clear out of the way enough, they actually realize that this is a pattern that is life's pattern. And the reason why this is happening right now is because it is coming through us, because we are life. And it's like, I mean, Paul has put it beautifully many years ago when he wrote his book, Blessed Unrest, and he called it the planetary immune response kicking in. Ultimately, what I think your role is, John, with business leaders is to really inspire them into that possibility that it's not necessarily about somebody handing you the 10 commandments or the 10 principles or the blueprint or the roadmap or the strategy implementation plan, but it is about that capacity to respond by actually getting out of the way and listening to the whole system as part of the system. So life working through us, rather than, it's that fundamental shift of these things is like, very often it's not what we do, but how we are that really repatterns. And what we need to do is we need to fall out of the degenerative patterns into regenerative patterns. And the biggest ally that we've got is life itself, because it just intuitively feels right when we go back to nurturing salutogenic patterns after centuries of being destructive of our own. Like, I mean, DHL wrote over 100 or almost 100 years ago, what's wrong with us? We're bleeding at the roots. I just recently was part of this wonderful project where friends of mine, inspired by the talk I gave at Findhorn, where I end with the Rilke poem, Dear Darkening Ground. They've now put this to, like, their Vandana Shiva read the poem and then put it to a beautifully animated 90-second clip.
Beautiful.
And it ends with this one message on a black screen in white letters, just say, we need a new relationship to life. And I think that is actually at the heart of regeneration. And that's why I'm trusting that it's not going to get corrupt. I mean, of course, they're going to try to corrupt it. They're already doing it. And but that doesn't matter.
But it's funny, just very quickly, you've just chastised me because, well, I'm putting it slightly strongly, because in January, you may or may not know, but we did quite a large conference with Aviva investors, and the subtitle, so it was called the Tomorrow's Capitalism Forum, but the subtitle, and it was a subtitle that I picked, was Step Up or Get Out of the Way. And what I was thinking of is you've got to step up or get out of the way. But what you just said is that we all need to sort of, in a way, get out of the way of ourselves, get out of the way of the systems of which we're part, and allow life to sort of come through in a different way. And that's actually been helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You know, the Guarani had no concept of ownership. You know, they didn't even believe they own their own lives. So that's pretty remarkable, because if you have that mindset, then it's like, okay, you know, I can hop my spirit from one generation to the other, to a tree, to a river, to a mountain. So I'm not going to be destroying that river or that mountain or that forest or that tree, because that, you know, that's the concept of me being nature, me being earth, me being part of this as well. You know, whatever I do to the river, to the mountain, I'm doing it to myself. And I think we live, you know, we're today with poor Floyd, with his, you know, with a policeman in his neck and saying, I can't breathe. It was a clear message for that we all felt, yeah, we can't breathe. I mean, we're getting to that point where we can't even breathe in California, or, you know, even here in Buenos Aires, when they're burning all the you know, pasture lands and everything. And it's quite terrible, you know. Sao Paulo last year, when with the fires, when we were talking, Daniel, and we were in Colombia, and, you know, Sao Paulo was dark at 2:00 in the afternoon. You know, it's like completely dark because of the smoke. So we're getting to that point where it's like our mindsets all of a sudden are sort of like, whoa, you know, we've been not manifesting our reality here, and we can, or otherwise somebody else is going to do it for us.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
sort of like the risk with artificial intelligence, which is,
Yes.
you know, it's kind of very comfortable and very nice, but, you know, I'm sort of like following a certain pattern that I don't really control. They're controlling my behaviors.
Yeah.
And so I think that is, you know, also the challenges that we're faced with. But as you know, there is definitely an emerging feeling of survival that you see in trees when they're, you know, they start to flower when they know they're going to die, because they need to reproduce their seeds. And, you know, we see it even in different plant species, you know, that you ask yourself, well, have we domesticated the tobacco plant, or has the tobacco plant domesticated us?
Yeah.
To survive, kind of thing, right? It's like, and I wonder.
It's a powerful question. And just to be clear, when I was doing the book on AI, the journey was going to be big data, expert systems, AI, all of that stuff. And I went to talk to some of the people doing that. And I was really devastated is too strong a word, but more than surprised at how little they had thought about unintended consequences and how little they knew about the history of past technologies having unintended consequences. And what I was trying to push it towards was the notion of artificial wisdom, that at some stage you might capture some of the wisdom of indigenous peoples or so on, and start to use that, if you're going to use algorithms at all, in the core of the system. But in any event, I didn't go that direction.
What I find fascinating is that those two issues are somehow, like, we started off with the adaptive cycle as the abstracted pattern of how change happens in ecosystems at and across scales, because that's really what, like, people look at this loop and they interpret it as something abstract, but it is really 40 years of ecosystem science condensed into one graphic. And then the additional graphic is the panicky one, which just loops many of them at different scales, across scales. And what I'm beginning to realize that is that the fundamental redesign that business and civil society and everybody needs to work together to make happen is to fit human civilization back into that scale linking pattern that actually maintains health and wholeness in living systems. And our ecological, like the industrial growth society, simply doesn't fit. It's the wrong scale to those patterns. And part of this cycle is the confrontation, as basically Alex just did with Guayaki, taking the company through the valley of death that dissolves structures that no longer serve. That means 22% get bought out or left behind because they were part of of not wanting to make the next cycle happen. And it's the dissolution that actually creates that, like, moving towards the edge of chaos, that creates the creativity. I mean, this is Stuart Kaufman's point about complex dynamic systems are at their most creative at the edge of chaos, which is this place where old structures and old relationships break down so new ones can be formed. And right now with the pandemic, that's the constant state that we're all in at every level, from governments to different businesses to personal lives. And so getting more comfortable with breakdown and dissolution as the part, like as part of the chrysalis process of death and rebirth that we now need to go through, is vital. And the link to AI there is that I had this wonderful conversation with Michael Bowens from the Peer-to-Peer Foundation a few weeks back. And Michael was, in researching him a little bit before we had the conversation, I realized that he'd actually done a documentary about the danger of basically letting technology run away with us rather than harnessing technology. And one of the things he said is that there's a French philosopher, I can't remember his name, who pointed out that the whole project of the kind of Mars technological future, Ray Kurzweil and Hans Moravec and Singularity University and all that, that is basically an unconscious form of religion. We've turned technology and the belief in technology into something that is satisfying all the key points that previously religions satisfied, like give me the eternal life, absolve me from all problems and so on. And so we were basically unconsciously creating a cult to technology that isn't where the solution to these problems lie, because part of it is that we've created technologies in the belief that we're separate from nature and we constantly see them as other. But if you actually put even our modern high technology, something like this MacBook Pro I'm using, in comparison to a life form developing from 2 cells meeting and 9 months of gestation, creating a being that is then capable of learning, of growing, of stopping to grow, of growing qualitatively at the right point rather than quantitatively. The complexity of just one single life form is so much more advanced than anything we've ever produced. So I think we need to re-pattern back into life and understand the crudeness of our technologies, and that solutions come from 3.8 billion years of life's journey, knowing how to create conditions conducive to life and falling back into alignment with them.
Well, just picking up on that sort of thing about the architecture of religion and so on, I've often felt that sustainability has many of the characteristics of a religion, but I was remembering a book called Rocket Dreams. It's probably about 15, 20 years ago that I read it, written by a woman. And it was basic, I can't remember her name at this distance of time, but what she was basically saying that throughout human history, we had aspired towards the stars. I mean, cathedrals and all sorts of things going in that direction. But when it was frustrated after, we landed on the moon and all the rest of it, and we came back, we disappeared into the internet, and the internet became sort of almost the replacement. So we sort of adventured into, went boldly into the internet, whereas previously we tried to do it into space. And maybe now the internet multi-billionaires are now the people who are bankrolling their sort of the missions to Mars, God help them. So it's a very interesting tension again. It's one of these sort of loop dynamics. And one of the reasons why I think it's very difficult to see our civilization going back to that sort of natural flow is that the chaos that happens along the way is outside the capacity of pretty much every civilization to properly deal with. Although you may feel that there are certain ones that have managed it better than most or have managed it very well. I think most civilizations in the end collapse. But just to Alex, I love what you're doing. I love the story. Would love to sort of keep some sort of view of what you're doing. As Daniel knows, I'm writing another book, and one of the things that I'm focusing on there is, as it happens, the waves of societal pressure waves that drive change, and that's where the surfing metaphor comes in. So the very fact that you have a surfboard of some description behind you is a sign. It's a sign from somewhere. So you're a sort of marked man.
I see.
Nope.
I see. Yeah. I mean,
now that you're reconnected,
I'll make myself available, John, anytime. And obviously, I'm sure Lorna will give you some insights as well. Maybe you meeting with her for some other topics, but
no, I'm partly just interested in her, and there's somebody I know who's in New York, Catherine Harris, who's a headhunter, and she is now good friends with Lorna. That's where that introduction came from. But the very fact now that she's linked with you is just, it's another one of these sort of, some people would see it as spooky and woo-woo. I just see it as it's Earth saying, "Come along, dear, just get a move on."
the signs don't mind how we interpret them.
No, no, that's probably
it-
true.
I was, I'm helping just a really quick one, but behind the name Guayaki, I was just writing prologue of a book that the guy who's been building the relationship with this indigenous community of the Ache Guayaki for the last 20 years, I said to him, you have to write a book. So finally he got to it. And so I just wrote this weekend, the prologue on the name. And actually, it's really interesting because I had another conversation with Martin and with Pedro about names. And what's the origin of names, right? And you see, most of the names are given, like our parents have given us our names. And in the Guarani have actually given the Che Guayaki tribe their name, which means this wild men or wild rats that run around, almost with a negative connotation, right?
It sounds like it.
These are like wild people, not domesticated. And it was the Guarani who would just capture these Ache Guayaki in the forest and enslave them for themselves and for the Spaniards and whatnot, right? So when I go like, what are we doing with this name? And it's like, so then I got it. I go like, well, there's nothing wrong with being wild.
Yes.
Right? There's nothing really wrong with being, this people that live in the forest and forest people. And then it's like, it just hit me. It's like, that's the reason why we have this name. It's because we value the wild. We value that knowledge, that ancestral knowledge that this tribe has of just hunters and gatherers. We value the forest. We value that lifestyle, not versus the civilized, domesticated, lifestyle. That's the right thing. So I just went to Joseph Conrad and everything just like, oh my God, it's okay.
I love it. No, it's amazing how, I don't know whether they're epiphanies or what they are, but those moments where the brain wakes up to something that is just completely outside your experience and thought patterns to date and so on, or you just experience viscerally what you somehow knew because somebody had taught you it, or tried to teach you the alternative or the opposite. No, that's glorious. And Alex, I would love to have a further conversation when I've got a little bit further with the book. And what I'd quite like to do in a few weeks, if I might, with both of you, is just to send you the book as far as it's got, not for you to read it particularly, but just so that you can skim it and just get a sense of what I'm trying to say, and then I can explain where I'd like to fit what you're both doing into that space. But it's basically looking back 50 years to the Stockholm conference, although it's not formally doing that. Just it's the way it's developed, and then looking forward 20, 30 years into the future. And I'm using, as I've said, the waves metaphor because I think we're building to a very much bigger shift in consciousness and so on. Not all of it going ways that we would want to, but nonetheless it's going to, I believe, happen. And the surfing metaphor, I've been talking to quite a number of surfers and really enjoying that just for its own sake, but liking that, but also trying to, without being too heavy-handed, hopefully, but picking up Joseph Campbell's the journey of the hero, making it absolutely. I'm not positioning myself as a hero. It's about the idea that the business has a role in all of this. It's gone completely in opposite directions for much of its history, but if we're going to have any chance of making sense of a world of 8-10 billion people, whatever it's going to be, for a period at least, then business has to come around. It has to turn that sort of mental corner, cultural corner, whatever. And so it's got 12 chapters pretty much along the stages of the Campbell journey. But it also goes into areas which are probably not terribly comfortable for people in the sustainability field. So my family were originally in the armed forces. My father was a fighter pilot. His father was in the army. I'm named for the naming thing. I'm named after somebody that I talk about in the book, who in the First World War had the most extraordinary reverse, where he was a very successful officer from the Boer War, went into the First World War, which was completely unlike anything anyone had experienced before. Did something that was considered to be disgraceful, was thrown out of the army, joined the French Foreign Legion, and about 18 months later was back in the battlefield with the Legion, machine gunned, lay 2 days in the battlefield. And I'm partly going back to the deeper history, not of the Global South particularly, although they've had their wars as well, but in the Global North, we've just had this succession of wars, and it's almost become for a lot of people, we choose to think of it as almost like something you play games in, but it's not going to happen again. But I absolutely think that it is going to happen again. And I spent 5 hours on Monday of last week with the Minister of Defense. So I'm not a part of the world that I normally deal with, but there's a very senior general who's been charged with looking at the climate emergency and trying to work out what it means for the security and defense of the United Kingdom. And so I find it quite interesting to be in some of those conversations. So some of that's coming through into the book. But if either of you would be willing to have a look at it sometime towards the end of the year, I would love to have your reactions.
It'll be an honor.
Yeah. And on the climate and security issue, there is already work, like, how Nigel Topping is as the UK high-level climate champion.
I do, yes.
Has this group of people that are working in different areas, and there is a conversation around getting the armed forces to speak up on climate change at COP26 as well. And
yeah, well, and that's what part of this session was all about, which was beyond talking up at UN conferences. What is it that the armed forces can do, not simply to ward off the risks and threats that are created by the emergency, but actually to do stuff that is genuinely preventive?
I'll send you a paper that a friend of mine has already started this conversation with the African Union.
Fascinating.
And found a lot of positive feedback there. The notion of transnational peace engineering course, where
I love it.
Where you engage 10% of the military budget of every country into transnational regional cores, where they put their engineers towards rolling out photovoltaics and proper sewage treatment systems and basic infrastructure that is sustainable from the start, getting them involved in ecosystems restoration, and in the process of building relationships within a regional setting between the military commanders, you make the likelihood of war in that area already lesser. It's a bit like the African peace parks,
yes,
where the national parks work cross-boundary to protect the environment. That also has created less likelihood for armed conflict between those countries.
Daniel, I'd love to know more about that. Not least, about 3 weeks ago, the Carnegie Institute, who I'd never come across. I mean, I know the history of the individual, but they got in touch and asked whether I would write an essay for a book on peace, security, defense, war, and all of that. So I've said yes, madly. So anything that can be fed into the hopper would be very welcome. But again, immense thanks for just keeping this conversation going long. I'm deeply grateful.
Well, wonderful to have had the opportunity to speak to both of you and reconnect you. I'll stop the recording now. Thank you for a wonderful conversation.
Fantastic.